The snow began to fall harder the moment Elias Carter stepped into the muddy clearing, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath to witness what would happen next. The auction crowd was small, too small for comfort, men with hollow eyes, women clutching shawls, traders smelling of desperation and cheap whiskey. Elias hadn't come to buy anything. He'd only followed the sound of shouting down from the ridge, hoping to trade a pelt or two for flour. But then he saw her, standing silent on the wooden platform, hood pulled low, wrists bound loosely in front of her. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, his heart stopped. She didn't struggle like the others had earlier. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, straight-backed, as if dignity were the only thing she still owned. The auctioneer's voice cracked from the cold and disinterest. $1, he muttered. That's all she's worth now. $1 to take her off my hands. Laughter rippled through the thin crowd. No one stepped forward. Elias swallowed. He was a poor mountain man. No family, no land beyond the rocky slope he called home, no money to spare. The coins in his pocket barely amounted to $1 and change, saved over months of trapping and hunting. He'd planned to use that money for salt and lamp oil to get him through winter. Still, his boots moved before his mind caught up. I'll pay it, he said quietly. The laughter died. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, then shrugged. Sold. Elias placed the dollar coin into the man's hand. It felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried more weight than silver ever could. When he reached the platform and untied the rope around the woman's wrists, their fingers brushed. Her skin was cold, but there was strength there, alive, steady. Come on, Elias said gently. You don't belong here. She followed him without resistance as the crowd dispersed, uninterested now that the spectacle was over. Snow crunched beneath their feet as they left the clearing behind. Only when they were far enough that no one could hear did she finally lift her hood. Elias stopped walking. Her face was pale from the cold, framed by dark hair tangled from neglect, but it was her eyes that held him, deep, steady, and startlingly intelligent. She looked at him not with fear, but with careful curiosity, as though she were measuring the kind of man he was. Why? She asked. Her voice was low and clear, carrying a calm strength that cut straight through him. It wasn't broken. It wasn't submissive. It was the voice of someone who had known pain but refused to let it own her. Elias took a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Because no one deserves to be sold, he said. And because I couldn't walk away. She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. My name is Mara. Elias, he replied. I live up the mountain. It's not much, but it's warm. That's enough, she said. And in that moment, standing in the falling snow, with nothing but silence between them, Elias felt something shift deep inside his chest. He didn't have words for it yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life would never be the same again. The climb to Elias's cabin was slow. The path twisted through pine and stone, narrow in places where a single misstep could send a man tumbling into the ravine below. Elias walked ahead, careful to clear the way, glancing back often to make sure Mara was steady. She moved cautiously but without complaint, her breath visible in the cold air. You don't have to follow me, Elias said at one point. If you'd rather go somewhere else. I'll stay, she replied simply. There was no hesitation in her voice, and that unsettled him more than fear would have. He wasn't used to certainty, especially not from someone he'd just met. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked smaller than Elias remembered. Built from rough-hewn logs, roof heavy with snow, it leaned slightly to the left as if tired from standing alone too long. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. Mara stopped at the threshold. She took it in silently, her gaze lingering on the worn door, the stacked firewood, the narrow window glowing faintly with lamplight. This is home, she asked. For me, yes, Elias said. For you, it can be, if you want. She stepped inside. The warmth hit them immediately, modest but real. The cabin smelled of pine resin, smoke, and old books. A single room held everything Elias owned. A narrow bed, a rough table, shelves lined with jars and tools, a battered chair by the fire. Mara removed her cloak slowly, folding it with care before setting it aside. She looked around as if memorizing every detail. You live alone, she said. I always have, Elias replied. Parents died when I was young. No wife. No children. She nodded, as though that explained something she'd already suspected. Elias poured water into a pot and set it over the fire. I can make soup, he offered. It's not fancy. I haven't had fancy in a long time, Mara said. Soup is more than enough. They ate in silence, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind pressing against the cabin walls. Elias stole glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring not just the food but the safety. After a while, she spoke again. You didn't ask where I came from. Elias shrugged. You'll tell me when you're ready. Her eyes lifted to his, searching. Then, quietly, most men would have asked already. Or demanded. I'm not most men, he said. No, she agreed. You're not. That night, Elias offered her the bed and took the chair by the fire. He pretended to sleep, though his mind refused to rest. He kept replaying the moment she'd spoken at the auction, how her voice had cut through the noise and gone straight to something raw inside him. He'd lived his whole life believing he was meant to be alone, that the mountain was both his refuge and his fate. But now, with her presence filling the cabin, the loneliness felt different, less like a sentence, more like something that could finally end. In the early hours of morning, he heard her stirring. You don't have to do that, Mara whispered. Do what? Give up your bed. Elias smiled faintly in the darkness. I'm used to the chair. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, Elias, thank you. For yesterday. For not treating me like a thing. His throat tightened. You're not a thing, he said. You're, Mara. She didn't respond, but he felt the weight of her gratitude settle into the room like a promise. Days passed, then weeks. Winter deepened its hold on the mountain, but the cabin grew warmer, not just from the fire, but from the life slowly taking root inside it. Mara helped without being asked, learning the rhythms of Elias's days, adding her own strength where it was needed. She gathered herbs, mended clothes, and spoke little of her past, though sometimes Elias caught shadows in her eyes that told him it wasn't gentle. One evening, as snow piled high against the door, Mara finally spoke. They took me from my home, she said quietly, staring into the fire. After my father died, said I had debts to pay. I ran. They caught me. Elias clenched his fists. I'm sorry. They sold me twice, she continued. The first man died. The second didn't want me once he realized I wouldn't break. Elias looked at her then, really looked. You didn't deserve any of that. I know, she said. That's why I'm still standing. Her strength humbled him. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. You're safe here. No one will take you from me. She met his gaze. I believe you. And in that quiet exchange, something unspoken but powerful passed between them, a bond forged not from ownership or rescue, but from mutual respect and choice. Trouble came with the thaw. As winter loosened its grip, strangers began to pass through the mountain trails again, traders, hunters, men looking for easy profit. One afternoon, Elias returned from checking his traps to find Mara tense, standing by the door. Two men were here, she said. Asking questions. What kind of questions? Elias asked. About you. About me. Fear coiled in his chest. Did they recognize you? I don't know, she said. But they didn't like that I wouldn't answer. Elias knew then that the mountain, for all its isolation, could no longer protect them completely. The past had a way of finding people who tried to outrun it. That night, he sharpened his knife by the fire, jaw set. If they come back, they won't take me, Mara said firmly. Not again. He looked at her, seeing not a woman he'd bought for $1, but someone priceless, someone who had chosen to stay, to trust, to build a life with him in the most unlikely of places. And as the wind howled outside, Elias understood something at last. Love didn't arrive in grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Sometimes, it arrived in a hooded figure at a forgotten auction, speaking a single sentence that changed everything. Mountain man paid just $1 for hooded woman. When she spoke, he knew she was the one. The men returned 3 days later. Elias sensed it before he saw them. The mountain had its own language, silences where birds should have been singing, a tension in the wind that pressed against his chest like a warning. He was splitting wood when the sound of boots crushed through the thawing snow below the ridge. He straightened slowly, axe still in hand. Two men emerged from the trees. They wore travel-worn coats and carried themselves with the careless confidence of those who believed the world owed them obedience. One was tall and narrow-eyed, the other broad-shouldered with a scar pulling at his mouth. We're looking for a woman, the scarred man said, his gaze already drifting toward the cabin. Elias stepped forward, planting himself between them and the door. "You're trespassing." The narrow-eyed man smirked. "Easy there, mountain man. We just want to talk." Mara appeared in the doorway behind Elias. She hadn't been hiding. She never did. Her presence was quiet but unyielding, like stone beneath water. "That's her," the narrow-eyed man said softly. "I knew it." Elias's grip tightened on the axe. "She's not going anywhere." The scarred man laughed. "You bought her for $1. That don't make her yours." Elias's voice was steady. "I didn't buy her to own her. And she's here because she chooses to be." Mara stepped beside him. "I'm not going back," she said. "If that's why you came." The narrow-eyed man's expression hardened. "You owe debts, girl. You don't get to choose." Elias moved before the man could take another step. The axe head struck the frozen ground between them with a crack that echoed through the trees. "She does," Elias said. "And you're leaving." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he muttered. "People don't just disappear." They turned and left, their figures swallowed by the trees. But Elias knew better than to believe it was finished. That night, Elias reinforced the cabin door and checked the traps closer to home. Mara watched him silently, her hands steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. "I won't be the reason you get hurt," she said finally. Elias looked up. "You're not a reason. You're my life." The words surprised him as much as they did her. They hung between them, fragile and honest. She stepped closer. "If they come again, they won't take you," he said. "I swear it." Mara studied his face, then nodded. "Then I'll stand with you." The men returned at dawn. This time, they weren't alone. Elias counted 4 figures moving through the trees. His heart pounded, but his resolve held. He woke Mara quietly, pressing his father's old hunting knife into her hand. "If anything happens," she closed his fingers around the handle. "We face it together." The men surrounded the cabin, voices raised, confident now in their numbers. The narrow-eyed man shouted, "Come out, mountain man. This doesn't have to be ugly." Elias opened the door and stepped outside, Mara beside him. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves, the air sharp with cold and threat. "She's coming with us," the scarred man said. "And you're stepping aside." Mara lifted her chin. "No." The narrow-eyed man sighed, as if disappointed. "Then you'll both regret it." The first shot rang out. It struck the cabin wall, splintering wood inches from Elias's shoulder. He reacted without thought, pulling Mara down as he charged forward. The mountain had taught him how to move, how to use terrain and silence. He disappeared into the trees, drawing them after him. The fight was short, brutal, and chaotic. Elias knew every rock, every fallen log. One man slipped and went down hard. Another fled after Elias disarmed him. The scarred man turned to run, straight into Mara's blade as she defended herself with fierce, trembling resolve. When it was over, the narrow-eyed man lay bleeding in the snow, staring up at Elias with disbelief. "You weren't worth the trouble," he rasped. Elias didn't answer. He watched until the man crawled away, then turned back to Mara. She stood shaking, blood on her hands, eyes wide, not with horror, but with relief. "It's done," Elias said, pulling her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest, breath ragged. "I knew you were strong," she whispered. "I didn't know how much." They buried the traces of violence and returned to the cabin. The mountain was quiet again, as if satisfied. That night, they sat by the fire, hands clasped. The fear lingered, but so did something stronger, a certainty forged in shared danger. "I stayed because I felt safe," Mara said softly. "But now I know why." "Why?" Elias asked. "Because you see me," she said. "Not as something you rescued. Not as something you own. But as someone who chose you." Elias swallowed. "I've never been chosen before." She smiled gently. "Neither have I." Spring came slowly, but it came. The snow retreated, revealing green shoots and flowing streams. With it came change. Elias and Mara began to speak of the future, not as a distant idea, but as something real and shared. They expanded the cabin together, laughing over crooked beams and splintered fingers. Mara planted a small garden. Elias built a fence. The mountain, once silent, seemed to watch with approval. One evening, Elias stood awkwardly by the fire, hands fidgeting. "I don't have much," he said. "No ring, no land papers. Just this place, and me." Mara looked at him, eyes warm. "That's everything." He took a breath. "Then will you stay?" Not because you need shelter. But because you want a life, with me. She didn't hesitate. She took his hands. I already have. They married quietly beneath the pines, no witnesses but the mountain and the sky. Elias carved a simple band from silver he'd saved for years. Mara wore it like a crown. Years passed. The cabin became a home known to travelers as a place of kindness. Elias traded pelts and wood, Mara offered food and healing herbs. People came and went, but the mountain man and the woman he'd paid $1 for remained, a partnership built on respect and choice. Sometimes, at night, Elias would watch Mara by the fire and think of the auction, the hood, the single word that had changed his life. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her once. That day, she smiled, leaning into him. "Every road I walked led me here. I regret nothing." When winter returned, harsher than before, they faced it together, stronger, wiser, unafraid. The mountain no longer felt like a refuge from loneliness, but a witness to love born in the unlikeliest place. Elias had paid $1 that day. But what he received was priceless. Not a possession, not a debt, but a partner who chose him, and a life forged not by fate alone, but by courage, kindness, and the quiet power of seeing another human being for who they truly are. And that, the mountain knew, was worth more than all the gold in the world.